Specifically, we're looking at Kickstarter campaigns, which is a type of donation-based crowdfunding, and whether or not successful Kickstarter campaigns seem to happen in the same places as venture capital. And what we find is that there's some similarities. Some of it is just where people are living, where you have engineers and other types of people that might be involved in invention, but there's also a lot of differences. So even within the Bay Area, for example, venture capital is really focused on the peninsula, but you see more crowdfunding campaigns in some of the outer line regions, so areas like Marin and Napa, where there are some people, it looks like, that have some interesting ideas, but who may be off the radar for venture capitalists. The other thing that we show, which is perhaps one of the most interesting pieces of the paper, is that there seems to be a relationship, a real complementary relationship between crowdfunding and venture capital. Places that have successful crowdfunding campaigns then seem to have more venture capital investment over the next 2 to 3 years. I think there's a couple of reasons why that could be true. The first is that the funding that's raised through the Kickstarter campaigns may allow the entrepreneurs to develop their ideas further, maybe actually put a product out on the market, which could help them to attract venture capitalists. The other thing that could happen is that venture capitalists are also able to monitor these platforms, and so they can look at the platforms, see what the top crowdfunding campaigns are, and that may give them some ideas about which companies could be interesting to invest in. There's a number of interesting places where we see little pockets of successful crowdfunding where you don't see a lot of venture capital. So one is Salt Lake City, Utah. There's another little pocket that we saw near Boise, Idaho. Also some that were a little bit less expected. Those are maybe not so unexpected. Even though they've been off the radar for venture capital, there are good universities in both places. There's some significant engineering communities. Boise, Idaho in particular has a number of disk drive manufacturers now, and so there's a number of engineers there around that. But Miami was also another region, place that we don't typically think of as being big for innovation, but there were a number of successful campaigns there. And it's a large city that has a diverse population that probably has some interesting ideas. There are some ways that we can think about what the economic impact of this is. Now, the economic impact isn't necessarily direct in the sense that we haven't looked at how does successful Kickstarter campaigns influence the economic vitality of the region, though that could be an interesting question for future research. But we do know something about how it affects future venture capital. So if there's a doubling in the amount of sort of the number of successful Kickstarter campaigns in a region, then we'd expect to see about 10% more venture capital in a region over the next year, and a roughly similar size increase over the following year. So if we sort of think about what that might entail for the economy, that could easily be another venture started. And from past research that I've done, we know that the effect of another venture being started in a region can easily create on the order of kind of 300 new jobs. So a relatively small number of successful campaigns could make a real difference in terms of employment levels especially in smaller cities. One of the reasons why crowdfunding is of interest is that it could potentially expand finance not just to those that are in regions that are not covered, but also potentially to groups that have traditionally not been covered as entrepreneurs. So there's also a lot of interest in whether or not crowdfunding might expand access to women that are interested in starting businesses, to minorities. And there has been a little bit of research also out there, particularly on women, showing that it does seem like women are better supported in crowdfunding campaigns than they are in more traditional forms of entrepreneurial finance. One of the interesting things about kind of crowdfunding and why something like Kickstarter is different from, say, an angel investor, right, as a way to get something going, is that it's not just a source of funding, right? It also is providing entrepreneurs essentially with information about what the demand curve looks like, right? right? So one of the types of uncertainties that any entrepreneur faces is, okay, I have an idea for a product or a service, but will people buy it? And will people buy it at a price that I can, make money at? And one of the fantastic things about Kickstarter, if you have a, kind of something you're trying to sell to consumers, is that you can put a price point out there as, sort of what you would expect to sell it at, and just see whether enough people are going to buy it to justify developing it and manufacturing it.